Hey everyone, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and today I'm going to talk about the KEF Q150 bookshelf speakers. I am a huge audio nut, if you didn't already know from watching the channel, and I've reviewed a lot of headphones, gaming audio, some Alta audio speakers in the past, but I haven't really reviewed a wide selection of speakers, and I'm hoping to change that this year. I own a lot of different speakers, and my audio journey when I was younger started with speakers, not headphones or gaming audio, especially back then. Gaming headsets back in the day were pretty terrible. So, but I've always been into music since I was a kid, and I've had these for a while. This was not sent to me for review. I purchased these, and I'm like, you know what? I enjoy them so much, I might as well talk about it. So this is an honest and unbiased review. I do that with all my videos, regardless if it was sent to me or not. But in light of finding out there's been some recent price cuts on the Q150 and all the things that this is good for, I had to make a video. Now, when the KEF Q150s came out, they retailed for $600 for the pair, and that's when I bought mine. And I never felt like I didn't get what I paid for. I always enjoyed it. The killer deal about this whole thing is they're $300 now for the pair, and you can get it in white, black, or walnut. It's a stunning speaker, and it does not come with grills, which wasn't a big deal to me because I like that I didn't see any spot for a grill to be inserted. It's a nice clean look. They do sell the grill separately. They're $20 each, at least as of the time of this review, in US money. And unfortunately, the grills are only available in black. So if you bought the white version, it's going to stand out a little bit and kind of change the aesthetic. So keep that in mind. Now, spec-wise, these are 10 to 100 watt rated recommended amplifier power. They have an 8 ohm impedance with an 86 decibel sensitivity. Most things can safely drive these. The 8 ohm is a safe impedance, meaning that it can work on new and older receivers and amplifiers pretty well. Now, are you going to get the loudest volume out of it? That kind of depends on, I guess, what your goals and expectations are, because it's going to depend on your amplifier and what you think loud is. Now, I'm going to talk about sound quality, but there's a few things I want to mention that made me pick this speaker initially. One is the size. It's 12 by 7 by 11, approximately, with the little rubber feet included. Now, the reason why I picked these is because this goes in a den. This is also my kids' room. The den is where my kids play, but I wanted a home theater set up for them. So if you're familiar with those like cube storage shelves, whether it's IKEA or Walmart or wherever you're buying them, that dimension is basically a square, and depending on how many of those you have, or what your confinements are, that doesn't give you a lot of options. The Q150s fit perfectly in there with extra room, and because they have an optional port blocker, basically these come with little foam blocks, you can block the port, which will help reduce any extra, inaccurate bass that's kind of getting trapped and boosted and reflected all over the place from the back of the speaker. You seal the back and put these on a cube storage shelf like that because you don't have any other option, doesn't mean you can't benefit from a really high performing home theater setup. So honestly, that alone was like the big reason why I did it. The other thing that stood out to me is because this is a coaxial system, the way it images is almost impeccable. I mean, like, you have the way they tune the tweeter, the mid-range and everything, the way it blends, and the magic behind their crossover, which I don't think gets talked about a lot. Usually in sub $1,000 speakers, you can hear the difference of a high-end speaker, partly because of how good the crossover is. Now, naturally, there's more power handling, better imaging performance, detail retrieval. Same idea with audio in general, when you look at headphones, stuff like that. But usually sub $1,000 speakers, you can tell it's a cheaper crossover. There's only so much you can invest. And the way they blend the frequencies between the tweeter and the mid-range, which happens at about 2.5 kilohertz, is seriously amazing. It doesn't seem like there is a disparity or separation of drivers, not only because of physically being in the same, radiation pattern, but the way the frequency blend is honestly amazing. And it has a richness to it and fullness to it in the mid-range and upper bass region, even mid-bass region, that I didn't expect. They kind of grow beyond their size. And even when I'm sitting there listening to them, I have them on the stands behind me when I'm doing like the critical listening. At the very first time I was, kind of cranking them, I have an older clip sub that I do just for a little bit of a boost on low frequencies for certain songs. And I wanted to make sure I turned it off. I wasn't sure if I turned it off at first because I was surprised how hard these were punching for the song I was listening to. Realistically, if you're using this for movies, you're going to want to sub anyway because of the LFE channel, the low frequency channel, and these don't dig below 50 hertz. So I would set, just to give you the power handling, if you are using this for intense movies, set your crossover to 80 to 100 hertz. It'll clean these up a little bit and they get incredibly loud once you do that. Now, I typically have these hooked up to a Denon AVR 4700, last year's 4000 series Denon. And when you run Odyssey's multi-EQ XT calibration, it tends to roll off the upper frequencies just a little bit. And because these have a little bit of extra sparkle up top, like 15,000 hertz and up, they complement each other well. You don't seem to lose any of that kind of uniqueness that the KEFs have as far as presenting and imaging and having that airiness to it. You can obviously customize your Denon via EQ if you want to fine tune it. But I think pairing is important to an extent. These are relatively flat, so they're not going to totally change the sound signature of an amplifier. The amplifier will probably have a bigger impact on the sound because these respond really well to different amps. When I was doing my critical listening, I had it hooked up to a PS Audio Stellar Strata, $3,000 amp. I reviewed that amp in the past, and I did end up purchasing it. I didn't want to send it back because it comes in handy for stuff like this. It sounded great. Now the Denon 4700 for movies it's kind of like, I didn't appreciate it as much at first because I didn't listen to it as critically. Not to sound like, a mean dad, it's my kid's room. It's not my main living room home theater system. These are too small for that room, but, and then in here I switch out speakers all the time. So I set it up, I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. And I start watching more movies on it. I knew this review was coming, so I started spending more time doing critical listening. And the most impressive thing is the imaging performance. And it's partly because of the crossover, because it's so seamless, it's less of a distraction. It's just one cohesive presentation of audio. I also bought the KEF Q150C, the center that matches these. And it's just, my idea of a really good speaker system is when you can close your eyes and you can't pinpoint exactly where the sound's coming from. They vanish. And this was sitting in one of those like cheap little cube storage things that you put like your toys in. They are both pushed to the edge because you don't want them recessed. You want them flush to the edge. I could not believe how good of a movie performance I got for something sitting on a shelf like that. And the center's pushed up to the edge of my TV stand. You always want to make sure you're cutting back reflections, so you don't want to set it on a desk like this where this is in front. Lift it if you're doing near field, or slide it to the edge for movies. That's just another audio tip. But when I was doing Star Wars, Elysium, like a lot of the sci-fi stuff, some of those scenes that are so dynamic, it's so engaging. And I wanted to mention this so I don't forget. These are on display at a lot of Best Buy Magnolia stores. Those stores, they don't do most of the speakers justice, but I find that some speakers present better than others in a room like that when you have a lot of speakers, and it's not set up optimally. The KEFs didn't sound bad, but they immediately sound noticeably better in a home environment. Some speakers will sound better, but not as much as you'd expect. I had an experience with the DefTech D9s and D11s, which I purchased in the past as well. I wasn't as happy with the D9s at home compared to what my expectations were set by the demo room, where I went with these because of the space requirement I had to fit in that room. I got it home and it far exceeded my expectations. And I was happy when these were 600. So you can see why I'm excited when it's at 300 and you're getting that level of performance. Now, I did a lot of A/B listening to my Bauer 606, the Bowers & Wilkins 606 S2, their revised version of the 606 bookshelf. It really exposed more flaws than I was ready to expect or accept on my more expensive and larger Bowers bookshelf. I'm going to be reviewing those too because I think there's pros and cons to most stuff unless something is really bad. But I played a huge mix of genres, and the song Bad Liar by Imagine Dragons, which is more of like a pop rockish type song, usually intimacy and soundstage don't always go together, because if it sounds, darker, less excited, more calm, it seems more intimate, right? And then you get something that's really eerie and presents the higher frequencies a little bit more enthusiastically. You get more of your soundstage and excitement up there, but it could take away some of the intimacy. That song, compared to the Bowers and Wilkins 606, these sounded more intimate, yet it still had a better soundstage. It had to do with the voicing in the mid-range. It worked really well for that singer's voice. It sounded rich, it sounded full and warm, even without a sub, yet I got way better presentation of all the instruments and stuff as the music picked up in my room. There's a song from, it's an EDM song, so like, electronic techno type stuff. But Sophie Tucker and John Summit made a song called Sun Came Up. And that song was probably one of the best reproductions of bass I've heard on that song for a bookshelf speaker, because it has this is where it extended deeper. When I first started listening to it, and all these speakers kind of need to be broken in a little bit, in my opinion. But it's certain tracks, the bass can sound a little one-dimensional, that harder hitting, let's say 80 to 100 hertz bass. But that song really showcased the depth that these drivers can reach for low frequencies. And it best showcased the crossover matrix, because that song was way more cohesive than the Bowers. The Bowers is like, okay, my mid-range is doing this, and I know my treble is doing this. There was almost like a clear separation of effort. And that was not existent on the KEF with that song. It's kind of like, certain songs, the more I get into them, like, geez, like these things are cheaper, and I'm actually liking them more for a lot of these songs when it starts showing off, how well tuned they are between that drive unit and the crossover, of course. Now, there's another song from a group called Out of the Woods. The song is called Silence You With Love, and that had with the Q150s, these are like their small, cheap stuff. And when I heard the way it had this perfectly centered, like phantom center, you would think a center speaker was there. I talked about earlier, you close your eyes, and if you have these put in the right position, on a stand, the ones behind me are Pangea, the LS 400 heavy duty stands. Put them at the right height so they're close to ear level, and then mess around with toe. But when you close your eyes, it was like I had a whole giant speaker right dead center in the middle, yet all these things were kind of filling the room. And that song really shows you and reminds you the difference of what good headphones can do versus what good speakers can do in the right listening environment. Because headphone can only soundstage so far. You talk about soundstage, but you can't pick up the true depth of soundstage unless you get into speakers in the right space. And this brought that song to a whole nother level. And normally I don't listen to all these songs to the end. I listen to like the first minute or so because I'm listening to stuff I'm familiar with. It's what I use for a lot of demos, my handful of tracks that I use to check things. And I ended up listening to way more of that song, and I'm just kind of sitting there just, jamming away genre after genre. And when you hear stuff like that presented in that way, again, you're questioning, I'm like, these are really only $300. Where does diminishing returns kick in? Now, there was an interesting anomaly. There's the song Carolina from Taylor Swift, and there's a weird, really subtle, like bass resonance that came from that. Almost like you could tell the enclosure is a little bit thinner. It resonated that like around, let's say 100 hertz, somewhere in the mid-range of bass. I haven't heard that bass sound that way before, so I think the warmth of this just slightly changed that. Now, if you didn't listen to the same songs critically every single time like I do, it still sounded good. I don't think you'd think anything of it. It wasn't perfect, and I think that these, if I had them crossed over at 80 or 100, probably 100 in that case, it would fix that problem, and I would restore the naturalness that I expect. The rest of the song sounded great. Even Taylor Swift's voice, although slightly recessed, just a little, I think between like 800 hertz to 1500 hertz. There's just a little bit of a recession on these, but I don't mind that because everything else is so cohesive and flat and symmetric, both on a dispersion pattern, for moving around the room, and again, producing all the other frequencies fairly cohesively. I didn't mind that just subtle recession, but that song kind of showcased a couple areas where, you can see why this is a little bit less expensive than some of the larger, heavier duty speakers. When you get into the higher end KEFs, the LS50s, for example, those have the meta material, and a lot of that stuff is to cope with resonances and to further tune the way the sound is coming off of the enclosure and the driver. So when you get into a less expensive thing like this, that's usually the type of stuff you can hear if you're really trying to pay attention for it. And I'll end on one more song just to further illustrate the bass performance. I've used this song as a demo in the past, and that's Try Love by Horace Andy. It's a reggae song. Again, really surprised on the bass extension I got on this. They dug super deep, deep enough for that song to sound the way I would enjoy listening to it. I didn't feel like I needed to sub. And that's with the port open. Now, really, I think you need about 18 inches or so, maybe a little bit more off the wall to get a properly balanced sound presentation between imaging and your bass, so you're not boosting it too much. But the beauty of this is that's your preference. You might want these or have to keep these 8 inches off the wall, 10 inches off the wall, and that's going to boost the bass if you don't stuff the port. If you stuff the port, there is a noticeable drop in SPL in the lower frequencies. It doesn't really affect power handling, surprisingly. It didn't seem like I can get much louder. A crossover would benefit much more. But if you find that the bass is too loud or too boomy, or you did what I did in the den and put it in that little enclosure, you may find that stuffing the port is going to give you much better performance. And if you're matching it to the Q250C, which has a sealed enclosure center, I think it's $699 for that center. If I'm wrong, I'll post a text on the screen. But that one's sealed, and that sounds much more like these do when you stuff the ports. With these ports open, these have significantly more bass response than the Q250C center speaker. I wish these were sold separately because I would just do 3 Q150s, to be honest. They sound so good. But timbre-wise, tonality, Q250C is a perfect pairing. I do want to talk about near field. And near field is basically when the speakers are, I don't know if they'd be this close for me, but if you picture them facing me on a computer desk, I have my screens. Some speakers do that much better than others. And part of that has to do with the tweeter placement, crossover matrix, performance compared to the driver. How cohesive is that presentation? So naturally, a coaxial system like this is going to have a better performance, typically, in near field. And that's the killer with this. And I think this is where my viewer base, based off comments I see, a lot of you guys and girls come from like the computer desk audiophile setup. You have a lot of expensive headphones. I've seen some comments, and you guys have an amazing collection. This is $300 for a pair, and you can get a really good amplifier under 200. So you're 500 all in to get, honestly, like just absolutely astonishing sound performance for when you don't want to use headphones. You're working at home or playing games. The imaging is seriously out of this world, whether it's 2 feet from you or 10 to 15 feet away. These do work well in a larger room, much better than I expected. Granted, you'll want to sub at higher listening volumes, but to me, these are like the gems at your low to medium listening volumes, where most people listen to stuff for an extended period of time, not the whole crank it and show it off to your friends and blow them away, but for how you'd actually enjoy it every day, they absolutely shine. I'm on a few Discord servers naturally online, and one of the moderators for the home theater forums and that home theater Discord uses the KEF Q150s, the 6.5-inch bigger brother of these, in near field. I'll show you a picture. I did ask him, and he said it was cool. He's using Kanto speaker stands. I think this is the SP6s or the SP9s, depending on the size or height. But you can easily use these in near field, and you don't even need a sub for most cases, and they work really well for that. So at the end of the day, I mean, I think for $300, I can forgive more things that I noticed, like the resonance I was talking about. The things I'm not a huge fan of is I wish if you bought the white version, it came with a white grill option. This is vinyl wrapped. You can hear it. It's not like it's a real wood finish. Even if you buy that oak or walnut finish, the darker wood color, it's a wrap. It's not real exposed wood. So something has to give at this price range. If you're getting it in something like this and it's just sitting on a stand, I don't think most people are going to think much of it. And again, at $300, you have to think that there's a lot of stuff out there that's just, you know, black ash or painted. So it's not bad per se. Truth be told, this will not hold up really well to damage. So I guess in some people's playrooms, that could be a question mark. This isn't as durable, so be careful with it. The back doesn't look super premium. You know, this is a standard, like, you know, if I were to buy speaker terminals at a parts store online to build my own enclosure, this is kind of like what you typically see. Not terrible. I didn't notice any port chuffing, you know, no air coming in and out. These aren't super high excursion drivers, so that wasn't really an issue for me. It's not perfect, but I do want to point those out because that's what people live with every day as far as like standing up the test of time and, you know, look and feel. So that about wraps up the review. I obviously don't review a lot of speakers, but this year I actually plan on expanding the audio coverage beyond headphones, DACs, and amps. I will be doing a lot more 2-channel. I'm going to start talking about turntables as well. Like I said, I've really been into this stuff for a long time. I just kind of only focus my reviews on a couple categories. So hopefully you, my existing viewer base, found this interesting. And if you're new to the channel, thank you so much for stopping by. Hope you found the video helpful. And I'll put some suggestions below in the description for what I think would be good options. In the near field side, there's like 3 amazing little setups you can do under 200 that'll work really well. And, you know, 500 and up, you get into Denon, the Burson Audio Funk, which is also a headphone amp. So there's a lot of different areas of wiggle room for near field and desk setup. And then obviously sky's the limit. Now KEF has a very wide range of speakers. The Q150 is basically their tiniest little, it's one of their smallest of their entry level line, the Q series. And now you're going to see more of the higher end stuff come out this year. But just because it's one of their smallest, cheapest speakers doesn't mean it's a bad speaker. And I would take this over any other computer speaker option on the market right now. They just perform so well. And then you're benefiting on the home theater and music side. So I do like these. I'm not biased. I get nothing out of this. I haven't even told KEF I was reviewing it. I'm just going to do the review. And KEF, if you're watching, nice. So anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're new to me, I do have a Discord server we started recently. If you want to talk about audio more, we have some really good guys and gals in there talking about this all the time. So anyway, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.